You know, sometimes I think, no, it's not even that at this point. It's I know some of y'all are delusional. Straight up delusional. Like y'all just live in this fictitious world where nothing happens, goes wrong, or anything. And sometimes y'all need to be reminded that this world is disturbing. Disturbing. And who else to do it than me? I can find some things to remind y'all of how crazy this world is, how weird, mysterious, how things happen, all this kind of stuff. We're going to look at some stories from our disturbing world. Shout outs to Rainbot for the video. Let's go.
15% off. And with all that said, let's begin. Welcome to the return of Stories from Our Disturbing World, the series where we take a tour of the dark side of reality. And in this episode, we look at 5 real-life tales dealing in everything from child predators wanted by the FBI, all the way to a man who was possibly abducted by his own government in broad daylight. As the title suggests, the content in this video is disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. A few months ago, I decided to dedicate a video to an FBI initiative called the Endangered Child Alert Program, or ECAP, and what it does is simple. The FBI publishes media taken from actual child exploitation material, censors it as needed, and then asks the public to come forward with any and all information they may have pertaining to said media. In my first ECAP video, I focus on the program's people of interest, dubbed John and Jane Doe, individuals who most likely have direct answers in regards to an endangered child. In case you haven't seen that video, then I do highly recommend giving it a look, or heading over to the ECAP site itself. Now, since making that video, the list of John and Jane Does doesn't seem to have budged, but there is more I'd like to cover. ECAP also has a page dedicated to the identification of objects and places that are linked to child abuse. The site itself states the following. Law enforcement officials are seeking information about certain images which may help lead to the identification and rescue of child victims. The FBI utilizes image analysis to identify clues to where a child may be held. By recognizing these clues and/or sharing additional observations from the backgrounds of these images, you may help, first, to identify and rescue the child victims, and second, to capture the perpetrator. There is no clue or piece of information too small. As mentioned in my last coverage of this program, if you do recognize anything I'm about to show you, then submit a tip to the FBI immediately. I'm going to ask that you don't forward any tips my way since I don't have the legal authority to intervene. ECAP 4 is an image of a red cap with some kind of logo on it, and given this, I have a feeling that it might be the most easily identifiable piece of this entire lineup. Also take note of the background, and as with all of these, take a closer look even if at first glance it doesn't seem to ring a bell. Again, as the FBI said, no piece of information is too small, so even if it's just down to identifying the logo itself, you would still be helping. Next up is ECAP 5. The image is unfortunately extremely vague and hard to discern, but it appears to show skin and a bit of what to me looks like a dresser. ECAP 6 is another vague one, but seems to be slightly easier to make out than ECAP 5. Here we see what we can assume to be skin, along with a wooden dresser in the background. Now, while this dresser does look somewhat generic, note the orientation of its hardware because this could differentiate it from other similar furniture. ECAP 7, which in my opinion provides us with a lot more to work with than most of the other images here. To the left, we have what is clearly an adult male's leg, presumably on a bed in what looks like a child's room. In the background, we see toys along with a few folded blankets. One that's primarily pink and another primarily blue with some kind of pattern on it. On top of the blankets is what appears to be a Minnie Mouse doll. ECAP 8. Here we have what looks like a wooden headboard carved with a celestial design. It features both the sun and moon along with stars. Beneath the carving is what appears to be either pillows or a blanket with a dark blue color and stripes. ECAP 9 is a mess, both literally and in terms of possible clues. The most obvious elements here are the blue chair along with what looks to either be a wooden stool or side table. In the background we have a wire shelf containing what looks to be various board games and other random items. On the floor we see what might be a beanie amongst a pile of what seems to be books and pamphlets. Next we have ECAP 10. This one is pretty straightforward, but also pretty chilling. We have what seems to be a child wearing a long-sleeved garment with multicolored owls. In the background, we see some kind of carpet or blanket, although it's tough to say for sure. In the next image, ECAP 11, we see the same carpet/blanket as before, but this time with various items next to and partially underneath it. Second to last, we have ECAP 12, which features a close-up of what seems to be a child's wrist. Said person is wearing a couple of bracelets and a single hair tie. The blue item appears to have writing on it, although it's unclear what it says. And finally, we have ECAP 13. The only word fully visible here is middle, with the preceding word presumably being Williams. Below that are what appears to be the numbers 1 and 7, and below that is what looks to be a partial logo. This one is tough given how much of it is obscured, but we can assume that this has to do with some kind of school, one that might have blue and white as their colors. Now again, if any of this rings a bell, then please contact the authorities immediately. On top of that, you can also help by spreading the word.
That's what I was just about to say. Spread the video, send it out to everybody. Even if you go to Rainbot page and send that video, the original video and not the reaction. Just get the word out, man, because you'll be surprised, bro. That little small image, just that brief image could spark a memory and somebody be like, yo, I was at somebody's house like that. It could save a life, could save a person. You never know. So this is important, man. Seriously. Like, seriously. Look at it. Even if it may jog something in your memory. You might have been over somebody's house and didn't know until you saw that and it rung a bell. So spread the word.
If you go to the ECAP site itself, then you'll be able to download wanted posters and help get as many eyes on this as possible. I've been covering true crime for several years now, and in most cases, this is how it goes. A crime will be committed, and slowly but surely, investigators will uncover clue after clue, eventually exposing the truth. While twisted, the logic of these perpetrators in most cases makes sense. They take steps to cover their tracks and to keep authorities guessing. Now, those stories tend to get the most attention, but there are cases that genuinely make you question what the hell the perp was even thinking, and one such instance took place just a few years ago in Camptown, Pennsylvania. Sometime after 5 p.m. on Thursday, May 31st of 2018, a passerby spotted a body floating in Camptown's Wyalusing Creek. Reports differ on the exact circumstances of the discovery, with some suggesting that a UPS driver saw the person in the water and asked locals for help getting them out, while others say that this driver didn't find the body but was instead flagged down by whoever did. The exact conditions of the corpse are a little unclear too, with the Pennsylvania State Police stating it was found, quote, wrapped in a large black tarp, while other later reports tell us the tarp and one of the victim's shoes were both found downstream. Regardless of the precise nature of the scene, the close-knit community was undoubtedly shaken by the macabre discovery, and seemed unsure of what to make of it. Few, if any, anticipated how close to home the person responsible actually was. Local law enforcement were quick to take control of the area, and the local press weren't far behind them. When an on-scene WNEP reporter asked a nearby resident for comment, little did she know she was actually talking to the killer himself. 38-year-old Matthew—
Yo, why do we keep seeing this? Why do we keep seeing this type of stuff? Where the killer is on scene giving a recount of something he saw or what he thinks, and you don't even know they're interviewing the killer. I swear I keep seeing this come up. Like, these fools are crazy. Look at them. Look at, like, yo, these jokers are crazy. But again, like I said at the beginning of the video, y'all think that this world ain't crazy. I don't know what timeline of world y'all living on, but we ain't on the same one.
Haverly would conduct an interview in which he theorized about potential motives and concocted a fantastical tale of big city hitmen who might have dumped their victim in a quiet rural area to separate themselves from the murder.
But during his interview with Newswatch 16, he said he thought it was someone from out of town.
I think it was kind of a hit and something happened. Something went bad, and this is like a rural area, so they just wanted to plant the body somewhere else besides wherever the hell they were from.
Now, in actuality, the victim wasn't some city dweller with links to organized crime, but rather Matthew's own 60-year-old mother, Patricia Haverly. He would later go on to describe having a rocky relationship with his mother since moving back to the area a couple years prior. According to Matthew, on these—
Whoa, y'all see what he... Hold on, let me see, can I go back? Matthew, the police say he told them he woke up Friday morning and couldn't find his mother or her phone. According to the paper, noting he allegedly also spoke about the contentious relationship he'd had with his mother since moving back to, however you pronounce that town, from California 2 years ago. I hope that right there was enough to put him on their radar. You just told them you had a contentious relationship, then she pops up dead, floating in a creek? No.
Since moving back to the area a couple years prior. According to Matthew, on the same day the body was found, the two of them had argued. He told investigators that during this fight, his mom had, quote, followed him to his bedroom and tried to punch him in his face, and in response he'd, quote, grabbed her arm and pushed her away before blacking out. Haverly would claim that he couldn't recall any of the events that followed, though as far as we could find, it's not clear at what point he regained his faculties. Whether this blackout story is true or not, we can't be certain, but what we can be sure of is that he lacked the foresight of the assassins in his imagined story. Doing an on-camera interview was already a poor call, but spinning a yarn about out-of-towners when there could be no doubt the body would be identified in a matter of hours was probably worse. Even more baffling is that the Route 706 bridge under which the mother was found, according to WNEP, was only, quote, across the street from the home they shared. And on top of this, the victim
right across the... This fool lived across the street. This fool lived across the street. Oh, Yo, bro, it's some different people across the street. Not down the road, not just a couple blocks over, not in another town or city, across the street. And you didn't think they were going to look at you? So you try to spin this little out of town story?
Second, she was found even closer to their doorstep than that. According to Star-Gazette, it was, quote, on top the creek embankment directly across from Patricia Haverly's residence. Mere hours after his televised interview, Matthew Haverly was arrested on suspicion of murder. A search of his shed would uncover a tarp that matched the one associated with the body, and a wheelbarrow likely used to move Patricia the short distance between her home and the creek. An autopsy would find bruises on her biceps consistent with the perpetrator's version of events, as well as other small lacerations to her arms and elbows believed to be defensive wounds. The coroner ultimately determined that the cause of death was multiple blows to the head. Having done everything he could have to get caught, short of simply handing himself over, it'll come as no surprise that the legal proceedings were relatively painless. Matthew Haverly was initially charged with criminal homicide, however, in March of 2019, would ultimately plead no contest to charges of involuntary manslaughter, abuse of a corpse, tampering with evidence, and possession of a weapon. The charge of manslaughter does perhaps indicate that his claims of being blacked out were somewhat credible, but equally likely is that the prosecution felt more comfortable shooting for a more sure conviction rather than risking a less desirable outcome. As of today, Haverly is still serving his sentence, which will keep him behind bars for a maximum of 14 years. He's currently held in the State Correctional Institution of Dallas, Pennsylvania.
14 years? 14 years. Murder, moved the body, tamper with evidence, weapons charges, and again, murder. I think I've seen drug dealers get more time than that. 14, wow.
And also happens to be one of the most dim criminals I have ever seen.
14 years. I'm still stuck there. I need a second to just get past that. 14 years? 14 years. Wow.
In the United States, the right to religious freedom is thought to be sacred, and while the state of pluralism in this country is far from perfect, it grants most citizens the ability to engage with whatever belief system they see fit without much interference from the government. It goes without saying that this isn't a universal situation, and in some extreme cases, your chosen religion can cost anything from your freedom all the way to life itself. Raymond Koh was a pastor at the Evangelical Free Church of Malaysia, and also happened to be, at least on the surface, a model for so-called Christian values. Raymond was a resident of a town near Kuala Lumpur, and was a driving force behind a charity called the Hope Community, which assisted the sick and vulnerable within the city and beyond. Koh was known to have helped recovering addicts, the homeless, single mothers, children, and even those suffering from HIV/AIDS. Now, despite appearing to be a paragon of virtue, the response to this community outreach was not what you would expect. Rather than gratitude, Raymond and his wife Susanna Koh would receive threats. On one occasion, this took the form of 2 bullets that were sent to their home. On another, they received an envelope with the message, "We want to kill you," and on top of this envelope contained a white powder, later found to be anthrax. So why would anyone want to threaten and seemingly attempt to kill people who are trying to do as much good as possible? To understand that, we first need to understand a few things about Malaysia and the laws within the country. In Malaysia, around 61% of the population is Muslim, and the government there would much rather see that number go up than down. For contrast, Christians only account for around 9%. While it's legal to be Christian, it's forbidden for anyone of a different faith to try to convert a Muslim, and it's illegal for a Muslim to change their faith. While freedom of religion is enshrined in the Malaysian constitution, in practice, this doesn't actually do much to foster pluralism. What I mean is that you're legally allowed to practice whatever religion you like, but you may run into legal trouble for apostasy. For those unfamiliar, apostasy is basically the act of either leaving or renouncing your faith, and in Malaysia, this happens to be a pretty severe crime. In the case of people like Raymond Koh, giving the appearance of trying to convert followers of Islam to Christianity would in essence make him an accessory to apostasy. Now, this is already a gross suppression of individual agency, but it actually gets worse. Not only are citizens expected to practice and preach Islam, but it has to be the specific flavor that the state prefers. If you're a Sunni Muslim, then you're on the right side of the divide according to the government, but if you're Shia, which the state banned, then you're also bound for discrimination and even abuse. In 2011, police raided a fundraiser hosted by Koh. According to
Yeah. And I can't say this for certain. This is all speculation, but I do think we will get to that point here. Just hearing how certain areas are and the laws and religion will mix, I think that will be the case here soon. I have nothing to back that up. It just seems like that's where we're headed with all the control. I feel like they will next turn their attention to religion and say, you must practice this, this, or this, or you will go to jail, or you'll practice this. You can still practice that, but you can't try to convert, or you'll go to jail, or you'll be this, and it'll be severe consequences that go along with it. I don't know why, I just feel like that way. And then I feel like they're going to start sticking their hands into that and getting money out of that, using tax for that, and if they're not already.
To Susanna, the raid was conducted by officers from the, quote, Islamic Religious Department, who brought an end to the gathering. The people in attendance were of varying races and religious backgrounds, though some of the Muslims present were singled out and taken for questioning and then made to attend a re-education session. In an interview with Christian Today, Susanna would go on to say, quote, "There's some accusations in the newspaper that my husband was trying to proselytize Muslims, but they could not find any evidence of this. It was just a fundraising dinner." The fact that there was no evidence to justify this raid, if you can call preaching a justification at all, didn't seem to dissuade the accusatory press, and for a short while, Raymond understandably took a break from the ministry. Before too long, however, he was back at it and continuing his efforts to help his community. Now, when the aforementioned threats took place in relation to this raid isn't clear from what we could find, but regardless, it would be on February 13th of 2017 that things would suddenly escalate. It was a Monday morning, and Raymond Koh was out for a drive. CCTV captured what happened next. Raymond was taken. As you can see, the abduction seemed well orchestrated, only taking around 40 seconds from the point in which the black SUV stopped Raymond's car to the point that the convoy starts moving again. The number of people involved also seemed excessive, especially given the fact that their mission seemed to be apprehending a single unarmed elderly man. This footage was the—
Yeah, that had to be some type of government or something. The way they moved, the way they surrounded that car like a militant style, front, back, side, everybody got out, gone in 40 seconds. Come on now. 40 seconds, taking him. Time, precision. Look at where they did it at. They even probably tried to canvass the area to make sure there wasn't no cameras. And look how the trees kind of covered up. Like, this was all done. No, this is no just regular person did this and just decided to go after him for something. No. You can't convince me otherwise.
The final time Raymond Coe was seen, and to this day, his family are unaware of where he is or if he's even still alive. When the Coe family approached the police for help, the authorities simply focused on those same allegations as before, that Raymond had been trying to convert Muslims. With nothing close to an answer in sight, the family sought help elsewhere, and in October of 2017, the National Human Rights Commission of Malaysia began investigating the enforced disappearance of 2 individuals, though there were actually 4 missing people with comparable circumstances. Raymond Coe was of course one of them, but a similar fate seemed to have befallen married couple Joshua Himley and Ruth Setepu. The pair were living in Kuala Lumpur and went missing in November of 2016. Ruth was a Christian who'd moved to Malaysia from another country, and Joshua was a former Muslim who had converted to Christianity while in Singapore in 2003. The 4th individual, a man named Amri Chimat, seemed to have a lot in common with these other cases. Much like the married pair, he disappeared in November of 2016, and similarly to Coe, he'd started a non-profit and was considered a social activist. When his wife reached out to law enforcement for help, she too was met with accusations that her husband had been spreading the wrong religious teachings. His case does differ in a few instances, though. He went missing in Perlis, which is far north of Kuala Lumpur. His vehicle was found abandoned, so it wasn't taken by any potential abductors, and he was a Shia Muslim rather than a Christian, although, as mentioned earlier, this would have still meant that he was seen as undesirable by the state. 18 months after the investigation began, the Human Rights Commission would conclude that the Special Branch, an intelligence agency attached to the Royal Malaysia Police, were in fact behind the disappearance of Amri and Pastor Raymond. During the inquiry, officers would often claim to not remember what happened or would state that they couldn't mention details due to the Official Secrets Act, which is of course potentially damning in itself. In a surprise to no one, the authorities would also state that their internal investigation had so far found no evidence of police involvement, though as of the end of the inquiry, their efforts were supposedly still ongoing. At one stage, the cops would point the finger at a, quote, drug smuggling gang that had been involved in a shooting in northern Malaysia, and claim that they were responsible for kidnapping Raymond Coe. Police said they'd found pictures of Coe in a house related to that gang, though these pictures never materialized, and the Human Rights Commission would dismiss the story in a rather brutal fashion, stating it was, quote, full of inconsistencies and material contradictions, and that it was, quote, an affront to common sense and logic. This dismissal, in large part, was due to one of the cars visible in Raymond's abduction having been seen parked outside of Amri's house just before he went missing. This car was traced to an 18-year veteran of the police force, but when the commission wanted to interview said officer, the Royal Malaysia Police told them that he was no longer serving and that they couldn't track him down.
Tied up loose ends. And they probably figured out that his car was the one that was spotted and everyone was familiar with. He gone. Loose ends. That's why I said this just wasn't ordinary, bro. No, they come on, we ain't crazy. No, we seen in a lot of movies and a lot of cases and able to identify that, yeah, this had to be some form of government or something. No. We ain't crazy, y'all.
So given all of those findings, what happened? Well, it turns out, disappointingly little. Later in 2019, a high-level task force composed of a retired judge and police officers was convened by Malaysia's Home Minister. They were given the task of investigating the findings by the Human Rights Council, and in the end they too would determine that Raymond Coe and Amri Chemat were victims of enforced disappearance at the hands of the Special Branch. Now, of course, despite all this information, nothing really changed, and while this was all going on, the cops found themselves a new suspect, a rideshare driver named Lam Chang Nam. They'd accuse him of both kidnapping Ko and trying to extort his family, and while we're not sure where this whole situation will end just yet, as of right now, this cab driver seems to be nothing more than a scapegoat. In April of 2022, the Human Rights Commission would complete their work on the missing married couple Joshua Himley and Ruth Sitepu. The conclusion was that they were also most likely victims of enforced disappearance, but in this instance, there wasn't any, quote, direct or circumstantial evidence to support the notion that they had been abducted by the state. In plain terms, it means that it might have happened, but they couldn't prove it one way or another. And as of today, this is basically where we're at with the whole situation. Though there have been several deep dives into these 4 missing people, and in 2 of those, the involvement of law enforcement was their conclusion, the whereabouts of all of them still remains a mystery. If that seems like an unfulfilling conclusion to you, you aren't the only one who thinks so, and there actually may be a way you can help. In February of 2020, Susanna Ko commenced legal proceedings against the Malaysian government, with trials set to take place in December of this year and on June 5th to 8th, 2023. It's hard to say how often this kind of thing happens in Malaysia. As you'd expect, there seems to be very little information about the phenomenon out there.
Please, after that case there, I'd be surprised if it don't happen at all after that. They just seen what happened to those people, and you know how word tends to spread around town. Rightfully so in these situations. Yeah. You'd be crazy enough to do what they did, you know? Even though you might not have a problem with what they did. Because I don't think it warranted this happening to them. Like, man, that's why I say, bro, and the scary thing about stuff like this is everybody's a copycat. So like I said, we could adopt those same principles over here. And you already know what extent our government and different agencies are willing to go. Just take a look at the JFK files.
That it happens at all, of course, means that it happens too much. And if you agree with that sentiment, you can sign their petition at www.releaseraymond.com. Rumors of influential child abusers have existed for what feels like forever now, but it seems in the last decade or so, the concept has gone from sordid hearsay to mainstream news, with one of the most notable examples, of course, being the case of Jeffrey Epstein. It goes without saying that public perception has shifted, and accusations that would have been brushed off or buried decades ago have now found their own voices, largely thanks to the internet and our much more connected modern world. In this segment, we discuss a story from a time where power and influence was enough to silence practically any victim. This is the case of British glam rock predator Paul Francis Gadd, better known as Gary Glitter. Much of Glitter's success came in the early 70s, with the flamboyantly dressed musician achieving 11 consecutive top 10 hits in the UK charts between 1971 and 1975. His popularity waned in the latter half of the decade, but he would go on to stage minor comebacks in both the 80s and 90s. It was in 1997 that Gadd would gain a level of public infamy resulting from an incident where he brought his laptop to a tech store to have them address a software fault. Of note was the fact that he'd asked the technician not to look at his files, which is perhaps the easiest way to ensure they would. Upon searching the musician's device, the technician discovered thousands of, quote, hardcore images of child abuse and opted to call the police. This quickly led to Glitter's first arrest. Law enforcement searched his homes in both Somerset and London and seized even more indecent material involving minors.
It'll always be those celebrities that we know and have come to love and follow throughout the years that you get older and you realize that's a creep. That fool's a creep. And it ruins your entire childhood. Yep. Several names come to mind right now.
Some as young as 2 years old. Following these searches, Glitter was released without charge pending further investigation, despite being caught red-handed. While the media circus was in full swing, the washed-up rocker continued with business as usual. Though his appearance in that year's Children in Need charity event was dropped for obvious reasons, and his cameo in the Spice Girls movie was also cut out, according to The Guardian, the ticket sales for Glitter's upcoming tour actually surged amidst the controversy. In December of 1997, this Christmas tour began as scheduled. It wasn't until November of 1999 that Paul Francis Gadd stood trial at Bristol Crown Court. Earlier that year, perhaps
After what he's being charged with and viewed as being a creep of, he had the audacity to do a Christmas tour. I felt like he was, at that point in time, he was just laughing at everybody, saying, look at me. I ain't changing. I keep doing what I'm going to do. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. That's pretty much what he said. I'm thinking he's saying to himself at that point anyway. When you have the audacity to do a Christmas tour,
perhaps seizing the opportunity while Gadd was facing public scrutiny, a young woman came forward to claim that she was abused by him at the age of 14. She stood to potentially win, quote, £25,000 in compensation if he were to be convicted. He would decline the opportunity to speak at his trial and soon after was found not guilty of sex offenses against a person under the age of 16. Allegedly, fans in the court's public gallery cheered at this verdict. It's possible that this outcome was influenced by the victim's potential for financial gain and the proximity of her claims to the trial, though it's impossible to say for sure. Now, Glitter would, however, admit to the possession of child sexual abuse material and be sentenced to 4 months of prison time. He served 2, and was freed in January of 2000. Upon release, he spoke of his, quote, deep regret at a public-facing appearance and told journalists, quote, I have served my time. I want to put it all behind me and live my life. He then proceeded to leave without taking any questions. Soon after, it would be clear what living his life meant. He would leave the UK and head to Asia, where his profile was lower and the chances of exploitation were higher. He initially traveled to Cuba with a native girlfriend to the country before moving to Cambodia, a place with a reputation as a safe haven for child predators. It's not clear exactly how long he spent living in Cambodia, but by the end of May of 2002, he'd been expelled from the country. Though he committed no crimes there as far as anyone knows, the nation's Minister for Women's Affairs led a campaign to oust Glitter, feeling that his presence was enough to tarnish Cambodia's image further. Gadd's lawyers attempted to fight the deportation, though when that failed, he moved on to Vietnam. In a twist that surprised absolutely no one, the man was once again accused of abuse in 2005, and the subsequent investigation prompted his attempt to flee the country. Glitter was detained at Ho Chi Minh Airport as he attempted to board a plane to Bangkok, Thailand. His undoing came in the form of an immigration official who recognized Gadd's name from a newspaper article and reported him to the authorities. Upon capture, he was taken back to face allegations of sexually molesting 2 girls. The defense would claim that the predator had been teaching the girls English, though 3 witnesses, including Glitter's maid, an 18-year-old sex worker who'd apparently been living with him, would testify to the contrary. Gadd would be sentenced to 3 years in a Vietnamese prison for his crimes, narrowly avoiding a potential death sentence for rape offenses due to, quote, insufficient evidence. The judge ordered Gadd to pay each affected family the equivalent of $230 in compensation, as well as a pittance in court costs. Upon hearing this verdict, Gadd feigned innocence and claimed victimhood. I have not done anything. I am innocent. This is a conspiracy by you-know-who. The you-know-who in this case refers to the mainstream media. In response to this outcome, British campaigners would explain that, while they were glad he'd been convicted, it was unfortunate that he was given the minimum possible sentence for his crimes under Vietnamese law. A representative of the charity End Child Prostitution, Pornography, and Trafficking would go on to say, quote, I hope that the British authorities will take time to investigate other allegations that could lead to charges when he returns to the UK. Fortunately, she would get her wish, though it would take some time. In 2008, Glitter was released by Vietnamese authorities. Though he was ordered to leave Vietnam, he did not want to return to the UK due to negative perception and possible prodding by law enforcement. What ensued was a few days of Gadd attempting to gain access to both Thailand and Hong Kong before biting the bullet and landing back in Britain. Upon arrival in London, he was met by 8 police officers who immediately took him into custody. Then, after brief legal proceedings, which he himself did not attend due to safety concerns, he was ordered to register as a sex offender. In 2012, after several uneventful years of being a social pariah, the glam rock has-been was arrested once again in the UK on suspicion of historical sex offenses as part of Operation U-Tree. Operation Yewtree was a UK police investigation into the past offences of wealthy and influential media figures in Britain, and sought to bring light to abuses that had been covered up, ignored, or dismissed in a period of history where it was way too easy to do so. It primarily focused on former radio DJ turned child molester and current-day corpse, Jimmy Savile. Though Savile and his associates made up the bulk of Yewtree's targets, its reach extended to Gary Glitter and several others. As a result of this operation, on February 5, 2015, Gadd was convicted of crimes committed in the 70s and 80s, including attempted rape, 4 counts of indecent assault, and 1 count of having sex with a girl under the age of 13.
And see, a lot of them be thinking they're going to get away with it. Now, to be honest, I didn't know they could go back that far, reach back that far, but I'm glad they did. You know what I mean? So these girls, these women can have some form of justice, you know? It ain't the everything they probably want, but it's something, you know, because they can't get back what he took from them. So, hey, one time for the authorities on that one. They got it right.
He was subsequently sentenced to 16 years and is currently incarcerated at the Verne Prison in Portland, Dorset. At the time of writing this, Gary Glitter is 77 years old, and given the length of his sentence, it's up in the air whether or not he'll ever step foot outside again. But it's pretty much safe to say that most people would prefer if he spent the rest of his life behind bars. When it comes to violence, we all have our own perspectives on if and when it might be justifiable. Differing opinions often make way for heated debate, especially when waters are muddied by politics and personal biases. In this case, however, the majority of those who have heard about it seem to be on the same page in spite of the undeniable cruelty on display. So, what does it take to have your suffering be applauded rather than condemned? This is the story of Karina Smith, the British mother who, for better or worse, took the law into her own hands. Karina Smith was, until recently, Karina Baines. She'd taken the surname of her husband Michael almost 4 decades prior to the event that would propel her into the public consciousness. On July 13th, 2020, according to police, Karina was, quote, angry and very upset at a rumor circulating about her husband. In an article by the BBC, the Crown Prosecution Service described the circumstances surrounding what followed as, quote, a dispute between Michael Baines and another family member. Now, with this alone for context, what she did next will probably sound insane. Shortly after midnight on July 14th, Karina Smith took a bucket from the garden of her Cheshire home, filled it with a thick mixture of sugar and boiling water, carried it into her downstairs bedroom, and poured it over her husband as he slept. Smith then left her house, walked 9 doors down the street, and knocked until a neighbor answered. She reportedly cried as she told this acquaintance, quote, I've hurt him really bad. I think I've killed him. After this exchange, her neighbor contacted emergency services. The officers who responded found Baines, quote, in excruciating pain and whimpering in bed with the skin on his right arm and hand peeling off. He reportedly told police, quote, I'm badly burned. I'm burned all over. She poured boiling water all over me. I just want to die. The combination of boiling water and 3 kilograms of sugar had created a tar-like substance that clung to the skin and did far more damage.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking, yo, that's gotta be sticky so you can't really get it off. Oh, so it's just, oh my God. I ain't never heard of that. Holy. Oh, I feel like I'm
than water could ever do alone. Medical examination soon determined that the victim had suffered severe burns to more than 1/3 of his body, with most of his injuries located on his arms and torso. Baines spent 2 weeks in the burns unit in stable condition before he began to deteriorate. Over the course of his hospital stay, he underwent several skin grafts and surgeries before eventually passing away on August 18th of 2020, around 5 weeks after the attack. It's undoubtedly a horrible way to go, and if you were to take the police's statements at face value, this all seems a tad overboard as a response to a family spat or nasty rumor. What the Crown Prosecution Service appeared to have glossed over is actually the missing piece of this puzzle. Reports from elsewhere indicate that the conversation that set this course of events in motion was actually one between Karina Smith and her daughter. In this conversation, Baines was accused of having sexually abused both his daughter and their late son Craig, quote, for many years when they were children. Craig, who was known to be troubled, sadly took his own life in 2007 at the age of 25. The day before his death, he'd allegedly said to his mother, quote, Mom, he's a pedophile. At the time, Smith had taken this to be in reference to a man Craig had assaulted and subsequently served time in jail for attacking.
I no longer feel how I was feeling before. I no longer feel like any sympathy or empathy for what happened. Just came over me just now for some reason. Yeah.
Though with her daughter's accusation for added context, it's thought that she realized that her son might have actually been referring to his father. Judge Amanda Yip, who presided over the murder trial following Baines' death, described Karina's scenario as such. Quote, you found it difficult to take everything in, but made the connection between what Craig had said the day before he died and what your daughter was telling you. You were described as livid and fuming at the thought of what had been done to your children. Smith would admit to having attacked her husband and ultimately having brought on his death, but would do so via a confession of manslaughter. She said that she'd, quote, lost control and that vengeance wasn't what she had in mind. The Crown Prosecution Service still opted to push for murder, feeling that, quote, her actions were deliberate and considered. This stance was in large part due to the forethought it would have taken to create an intentionally destructive mixture and the estimated 13 minutes.
Oh yeah, that was definitely forethought. She definitely researched that and figured that out. That ain't, if you got that in your mind, you need to be on somebody's list somewhere and heavily monitored. Because if you came up with that in your mind and held on to something, you're sick. You're sick. You know what I mean? And that rage from what she found out about her kids, like I say to y'all all the time, bro, it be the kids that could send us to a place that we never knew we could go. It be your kids, man. Your kids do that. They grab a hold to you, your heart, and you can go places you never thought you could go.
Minutes it took to make the solution itself. Though there's no hard evidence that Michael Baines sexually abused his children, and though his potential guilt or innocence was not the focus of the case, prosecutors accepted that these allegations had been made, and that Karina had believed them at the time she took violent action against her husband. The prosecution also believed Smith's claims that she had not intended to kill her husband, though she would still ultimately be found guilty of murder. She was sentenced to life imprisonment at Chester Crown Court in July of 2021, and will serve a minimum of 12 years before being eligible for parole. To many members of the public, this outcome seemed unfair. While the story isn't massive, much of the discourse about it online is centered around how Smith didn't do anything wrong, how others can sympathize with her and understand her actions, and how Baines essentially got what he deserved. Many feel she should be freed from prison, and there at one point was a GoFundMe page to support Smith, though it's since been taken down. In a BBC News article, Detective Chief Inspector Paul Hughes disagrees with much of the public's opinion, and was quoted as having said Karina, quote, killed her husband in such a cruel and painful way. It left Michael in agony, and rather than call the emergency services, she wasted time by going to a house 9 doors away to tell a neighbor. The BBC's coverage, unlike that of every other outlet, appears to have omitted Karina's apparent motivation for the crime. Exactly why this would be is unclear, although given their track record, it may not be a surprise. As it stands, with Baines and his son both having passed, the story is likely to remain incomplete, and the facts unclear.